Welcome to The Patient Physician, a space for doctors to explore their physical, mental, and financial wellness. Your peers and industry leaders will destigmatize institutional perceptions while redefining success, money, and personal care. Get ready to pull back the curtain, because here, you are both patient and physician.
Hello and welcome to The Patient Physician. My name is Paul Smith, and I am joined today by my co-host, Chris Fulbright. How are you, sir?
I'm good, friend. How are you?
I'm good. It is starting to heat up here in Texas, and I'm just trying to keep the weather down and not melt. But, you know, I was prepping for the show and going through the resume, and I know I've said this before, but there are times when you read through somebody's achievements and their resume, and for me, it always leaves me with going, just what the hell have I done with my life? You know, like I know we're both busy, but I really go, this person's living like three different lives, I think. I don't know how you get so much done. So today we are joined by Dr. Vipul Kella, and he is a board certified emergency medicine physician and healthcare executive with over 20 years of clinical and administrative experience, primarily in the Washington, D.C. metro area. He holds an MBA from Johns Hopkins University with the concentrations in healthcare administration, finance, and entrepreneurship, as well as an MD from the University of Toledo and a BS in molecular biology from the University of Michigan. See, this is where I have to take a breath. Do you see what I'm saying here? It's a lot, but I'm just started. So here we go. 10 years into his career, Dr. Kella pivoted into a hybrid physician role wearing multiple hats: clinical medicine, general partner of Physicians Capital Fund, and medical and scientific advisory. Currently, he practices as emergency medicine physician at Adventist Healthcare. He has over a decade of experience in hospital executive roles. Welcome to the show, Dr. Vipul Kella. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the intro.
And then some. You did it. So, where do we even start? Maybe start and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and how you even got into medicine.
Yeah, sure. Grew up in Detroit, Michigan. My beloved Pistons just lost Game 7 the other day, unfortunately. Yes, grew up in Detroit area, and just growing up, my upbringing, my father always said that we would love to have one physician in the family. I think that was like the inner motivation to kind of make your family proud, right? But as you go through it, you really get the interest, and you get the excitement and the bug yourself. As I was going through medical school, and I remember watching the old show ER. Mm-hmm. And actually going through rotations myself, and thought instantly, like, okay, this is what I want to do. There's nothing else I need to be doing but this. In fact, I would volunteer. I do this for free. I didn't tell my employers this, but I would do this for free. So I was that excited about it. I just thought that this is like the best job in the world, and I truly believe that. I think it's fortunate to have that mindset. That I can't believe I found like the right thing for me. I was excited about like the adrenaline of all the things you hear, all the adrenaline rush, the constant new thing that's coming into the door, solving acute care, like working with your hands, using your mind as well. Just this chaotic environment. So the ER draws a unique hybrid of people that love this chaos. I think we're all somewhat ADHD as well, so we just bounce around all the time. That's the story.
I know I am.
Yeah, so it was perfect for me. So I found myself extremely drawn to that, and decided that I would pursue a career in emergency medicine. And after I graduated medical school and applied into residency and trained in the Detroit area, which was exactly the place you want to be when you're trying to be an ER physician. You see gun and knife club, as we call it. Like, you just see tons of trauma and violence and acuity and sick patients and all the things that are a good breeding ground for a good emergency physician. So yeah, that was, believe it or not, I do often point to those Thursday nights on NBC, I think it was, watching ER back in the day. I know there's all these new ones that have popped up since then, which I don't watch ER shows anymore. But for me, back in the 90s, that was definitely something that I liked. And then actually just being in this environment felt really inspiring, like that this is really what you think about when you think about a career in medicine, helping people when they most need it and operating this stressful but really rewarding environment. The ER had all those things.
You don't watch the reruns of it to know what you need to say to patients, though, do you? Right? I mean, you already learned that from medical school. I just remember that movie, Catch Me If You Can, where Leonardo DiCaprio was trying to watch episodes of how to talk like a physician. Anyway, I just imagined that might be you, but probably not. I'm sure you're more trained than that.
I hope so. I know exactly the scene you're talking about in that movie. Yeah. It's funny when I my wife's a physician as well, and in our early days, we used to talk about interesting things that we'd see or conversations we'd have in the hospital or cases that we would have, and just we'd be a lot of back and forth. And now, 20 plus years later, those conversations are gone, and we are not talking about medicine. We are talking about mundane things in life, as well as just kids and vacations and all these other things, anything but medicine. Right? So it's interesting to see, not because we don't enjoy it, just because I think once you see something so much, you're trying to look to talk about something else.
You've got to have separation between work and life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What was the moment that you realized that practicing medicine wasn't enough? You wanted to go on and influence healthcare from either the innovation or from administration and be on that business side?
That's a great question. So I think there were a couple of realizations that I had, starting my career. Like I said, when I first started, it was this feeling of driving in every day. I can't believe I'm doing this. This is great. And having this sense of excitement. Over the years, that excitement kind of was met with a little bit of skepticism for a few different reasons, right? And I think the most important was that in the emergency room, you're treating people at the, when they most need it, but you're really addressing problems in that moment in time. And you start to feel like, am I really changing the system, or just, treating these acute issues in people's lives? Part of it got me thinking, how do I be on the other end, or much more upstream, where you're in the part of the innovation or the development of solutions, whether it's in technology or any other space in medicine that potentially could help prevent what we're seeing. And so that's when I started thinking about it, is that emergency medicine is great, but I also would like to be on the other side, where I'm delivering care or responsible for care that's more preventative, or that could address a much larger group of people. ER is a one-to-one game, right? You and your patient. And so if I wanted to impact a community or a bigger group of people, how could I do that? Mm-hmm. And I started exploring that in healthcare. There's just a huge opportunity to get involved in health tech and development of what's going on right now. So that was really how this all started. I think the other thing I'll say, just from a very practical standpoint, is ER is a young person's game for sure. And as you do it, it's definitely hard on the body. And I think that every physician will tell you over the course of their career, they've had some level of burnout or exhaustion, whatever you want to call it, moral injury, all these terms I hear used all over the place. And it's just this something inside you says, what else can I do to pivot to kind of create an impact in healthcare? In addition to the work that I do with patients all the time, is there something else that I can do? And that may also help prolong my career. One of the things I hear about, I just read today that, I don't know the exact stat, but there are 20 or 30% of physicians now are leaving medicine within the first decade of practice. And so you hear these numbers, and it's a fortunate thing for our system, because you have all these talented and brilliant minds that are now leaving, not because they don't like helping people. It's just because now they feel like the system or the type of work that they're doing, or the other non-clinical issues, non-patient care issues that are becoming more and more burdensome, makes them think, I just need to be doing something else, which is really, really unfortunate. But I think one of the things, and I'm sure we'll get into this, is that I'd like to tell people is that there's so many opportunities to affect healthcare and to deliver an impact, in addition to the work that you do with patients.
What drove the entrepreneurial part of this? Paul and I talk to physicians all the time, and we hear that, whether it be burnout, whether it be, hey, I felt trapped, I wanted to go find something else, but we don't see many physicians that then go start multiple companies like you have. What was that entrepreneurial spirit that drove it for you? Did you just see a need and you just said, there's nothing out there for me, let me go start a company and help people? What was your drive for that?
Well, I think that there's just a lot of different spaces in which physicians can have an impact, and they don't think that they can. One of the things that I realized when I started getting into health tech was just the lack of representation of physicians when you have teams that are building products or services. So when I talk to physicians about getting involved in tech, there's lots of ways that you could do it, right? Just number one is your domain, your expertise and your experience on the clinical side, treating thousands of patients over decades and having all those unique insights is really valuable. And I think we have a tendency to take that for granted, but this age of AI, like the human intuition and that instinct and all that, that's really, really important. So don't discount that. The second thing I tell physicians is over time, you develop a lot of great relationships and networks. Right. And as a physician, you don't necessarily think about, well, how can I use this? Or like, is this a benefit from a broader sense? But as I got more into entrepreneurship and realized those relationships that I've had or that I've started to build even more now that I'm out trying to get into things outside of medicine are really valuable. Because in healthcare, a lot of it is about, I'd say 30% of the game is building the product and 70% of the game in the actual distribution or commercialization of that. And that's where relationships matter, right? Who's going to get you into a pilot or a hospital or a health system to see if what you're delivering is going to impact people or produce the outcome that you want. So that combination of having that expertise, having the relationships in the network, it allowed me as a physician to be valuable to companies, whether I was working as an operator or chief medical officer or director or on the board. One of those things was usually required, right? They need a doctor that knows the clinical medicine, that can be on these calls and add some credibility, speak to the science, poke holes in the product, or they can a doctor that can open up some doors, right? Like this is a business, right? So who can you call? Do you have relationships with other health systems, with payers, with decision makers in healthcare? And once I realized this unique combination of those skills, and that's when I felt like, okay, being an entrepreneur is not something that you feel like you shouldn't do. And one thing I'll say is, in medicine, you're often taught that entrepreneurship is a bad thing. To say that, but it's really true. Like when I remember some of my mentors would really that you shouldn't be even thinking about that, but you can actually make an equal or just as big, or if not bigger impact if you have the mindset of both clinician and entrepreneur and try to blend the two, to blend those two mindsets. So I'm on, calls, whether I'm doing a venture capital call to raise from our fund or due diligence call, or if I'm talking about a specific SaaS product, I'm switching back and forth between the clinical and the business all the time. So having the ability to communicate to different stakeholders in two different ways is really valuable. So physician, and I'm not saying you need an MBA for that or any formal business. You just have to be out there and start thinking about things in that sense. Right? You're building a product. You are trying to make money, but you are also trying to make an impact, and both things can happen at the same time. And I think that gets lost sometimes when you go through this academic training. And the thinking is, well, you can't do both. And you absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I'm hearing from you. But I think that in my experience, I hear a lot of physicians that are looking forward. Maybe they do see that they sort of have a shelf life or expected, like how long I can really do this for before I burn out. There's certainly more people that have an eye on that, and certainly within emergency medicine. But they start to have some income. They want to have some savings. And the next thing they're really thinking about, how can I turn that savings or money into other income? How can I invest? How can I, broaden that? But that's not what I'm hearing from your entrepreneurial spirit is why you really doing this. It's a sort of a byproduct, if you will, is that you have diversified and will have this ability to have other revenue streams. But it sounds like more specifically, you identified that you could go do these things to make an impact, or a broader impact than the one-on-one patient to physician relationship. And so let me go do these things because I can make a bigger footprint and make change within the healthcare system. Does that sound about right to you? I mean, I think you got the byproduct of being able to have additional exposure to business opportunities, but seems like the main driver was to make change that was productive for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was really like the driver for me. I mean, don't get me wrong. Nothing wrong with making money, and I'm in venture capital. I mean, that is a very capitalistic, financially driven business to be in, and I absolutely, that's, if anybody says that you shouldn't, that they need to question themselves. So there's nothing wrong with that. With being driven about, and having a motivation to have a financial incentive. I absolutely believe that. And what I tell physicians that are thinking about investing in, to your question about alternative investments, and my experience is that most physicians invest pretty traditionally in public markets. And over time, whether you're a couple decades in, you start thinking about alternative markets. Yeah. And so the venture capital space for me is interesting because of the asset class and that it can deliver outsized returns. But more interestingly, because we have so many physicians that have come into our fund, is that it's an area that you all know really well. And you can actually take an active part in, whether you're sourcing a deal or working alongside a company or doing a due diligence on an investment committee. You can actually leverage your expertise in this space. You're not just writing a check and hoping things work out. And then the other thing I'll say is that physicians are looking to get into this space and to kind of make an impact. You get into the VC space, which I'm in, and you get a lot of exposure to deals and companies and networks that you probably wouldn't get in your clinical role. So if you're looking to do that and to break into the space and find out in whatever capacity, as an investor, an angel investor, an LP in a fund, sit on a board, advisory board, be an operator of a company, own a company, whichever way you're thinking about it, it's a great way to get that exposure as well. So when we have people come into our fund, those are the two messages that I talk about. The asset class and having a percentage of allocation of VC. I'm not giving investment advice, but for me, that's interesting. And also the network, being able to invest in something that is going to give you a lot of exposure to interesting technology and people that may help broaden your interest in pivoting in the same way that I did.
So you've talked about it a couple of times. Let's talk about the Physicians Capital Fund, if you will. Let's kind of pull that back. Tell us more about the fund and who y'all are looking for, what types of companies y'all are investing in.
Yeah, absolutely. So Physicians Capital Fund is an early stage venture capital fund, and we invest in early stage companies, pre-seed to Series A companies. The thinking about this fund was that, and I alluded to this earlier, was that there was an underrepresentation of physicians in venture capital. Mm-hmm. They're owners of our fund, general partners of our fund, or just having the ability to invest in a fund. There was a lack of representation, and most of the solutions that we build are for hospitals or are clinical in nature, and they're built for, and physicians are using most of these. So it only makes sense that you have a more active role, and the people that are facing these problems head on would be part of this game. And so that was really the genesis of the idea of Physician Capital Fund, is that we believe that the physicians that are working frontline, actively taking care of patients, or have decades of experience, are not only going to make just good LPs or investors, right, but are also going to help identify those winners, those companies that are going to really make an impact in the market. And so that's what we started doing about a year and a half ago. We started talking about this thesis of getting physicians involved and how they can be what we call strategic LPs, right? So working with companies in a much more active way than traditional funds may do. Yep. And I feel like we've definitely hit on something, because we had so much positive reinforcement and feedback about whether we're at a dinner or a large event, or I'm giving a webinar or a podcast and talking about this. And it seemed to resonate not just with physicians, but with what I say clinicians too, people that are in healthcare, and whether you're an executive or you're a practitioner of some kind or a physician. That message seems to resonate very well, right? That makes a lot of sense. We experience this stuff. I mean, it's very meaningful to us because we experience it very deeply on a daily basis, a lot of the pain points. And there are thousands of pain points in healthcare. There's no shortage of pain points, right? So they experience that very deeply. And so that helps them, if they're thinking about being involved in this space, to use that.
You mentioned pain points, and certainly there are a bunch, I think, depending on the perspective and specialty or area. But I think emergency physicians often do sit at the intersection of where a lot of system failures can show up. And are there certain systemic issues that you've seen that really pushed you into this idea of building solutions? Are there specific things that you're looking for, or are they looking for you? How does that interaction of finding the solutions and or the company or idea come about?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think from an emergency medicine standpoint, ER physicians have limited amount of data, right? You see a patient, you talk to them for a couple minutes, and then you got to figure out what's going on quite quickly. So we have this mindset that's built in over taking quick action with a limited amount of information and trying to do that as effectively as possible within the resources that you have, whether it's a crowded emergency room, a lack of beds in the ER, a new trauma patient that's rolling in. There's all these different variables that are going on. So amidst the chaos, how do you make a good decision right here and now? So you bring that mindset, you can bring that same mindset to the venture space, is that there's lots of different variables going on that you have to account for. Is that you have to look at the product, you have to look at the market, you have to look at the team, you have to look at the moat of the company. You have all these different things that we look at. Is that how do you look at each of those things individually, and also try to focus on, are they building a good product at the same time? So we kind of are built naturally to look at all these different variables. That's part of our DNA. In terms of the second part of your question is like, how do we look at deals and where we get them from? One of the advantages of having we have about 65 LPs in our fund now, the majority are physicians, is that we source a lot of deep networks and relationships. So we get a lot of deals sourced to us through those LP networks, right? Whether they have a relationship with another fund or a hospital or another organization, and we get a lot of deal flow that way. In addition to that, we have a lot of VC relationships ourselves. We are a follow-on investor, so a lot of VCs will pass deals along to us as well. A lot of companies come to us because of this interesting network of physicians and clinicians we have, and that they want to save space for us on the cap table because they know that will be useful for them at some point in their journey. So it's a combination of a few things. I think that, we leverage all of those, and, we typically will probably look at 900 deals this year alone.
Wow. 900. Wow.
Yeah. And probably over the next 12 months, invest in 10 to 12. And that's part of the advantage of VC as well, of what we talk about, is that it's the ability to figure out which ones to move on from quickly. Just as it is to figure out the winners, is to figure out which ones you need to move away from quickly as well. And not to say they're losers. That's just that they're not a fit for our thesis or our fund at this time. Mm-hmm. So,
or maybe the timing isn't as important as another option.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is it a normal 10-year hold fund, or is it 5 to 7 with an event? What does it look like in this pre-Series A type stuff?
Yeah, we have a traditional fund structure. There's only one capital call. It is a 10-year fund. That being said, the majority of the stuff that we invest in is non-clinical, non-FDA, meaning that there's a quicker path to market, and there can probably be quicker exits. So I would say that although it's a 10-year fund, that we expect to see some quicker exits after year 5. Mm-hmm. The 5 to 7 year period, because we invest a lot in workflow and back-end solutions, right? The non-sexy part of healthcare, $1+ trillion opportunity as well. So that's the stuff that we feel like we have an advantage in. Like I mentioned, we've experienced that pain, right? Unfortunately, but allows us to really understand those issues, right? What's going to work well in a hospital or an ambulatory center or practice? Like, what are the things that are really going to make an impact? So we play in that space. We feel like that's under a huge opportunity. I think when people talk about AI right now and talking about the clinical applications, there's a small number of those that have actually made an impact on the day-to-day care of patients in hospitals, surprisingly, of all the things that we hear about. The impact that we're seeing right now is things like in the back end, workflow, solutions, operations, billing and coding, compliance, all those things that they don't sound exciting. I get it. But at the same time, that's where we see real opportunity.
Can you tell me more about the software as a medical device? Obviously, we all know SaaS on the high-tech side. Can you describe more of that?
Yeah, sure. So I think we've all had some kind of device now that we use, whether it's an Apple Watch or a Whoop or an Oura Ring.
Yep.
So thinking about in the same way is that are there devices or wearables or software that can be used to monitor patients for a specific condition or demographic or metric, right? So if you, for example, we have medical devices now that will monitor for heart failure or diabetes exacerbation or COPD. And so can we use these wearables to get insightful clinical data so we can intervene when a patient's getting sicker or identify some important intervention that needs to be done to prevent them from going to the hospital or consume unnecessary resources. A lot of what we see in healthcare is late, right? So we react, and that ER story, like very reactive. And they're really sick, it's very reactive. And now at this point, like months or years of things didn't happen the way they should, and now this is happening in the emergency room, and we're taking care of what's the byproduct of all that's going on here. So the whole SAMD, or software as a medical device, is to interact with patients, intervene with patients, collect more data on patients in a meaningful way so that you can intervene earlier, identify which patients are getting sicker, even identify when populations potentially are getting sicker, and to allow for like planning for a pandemic or planning for a flu. There's all kinds of interesting applications for this. And so we look at that stuff because there's just such a huge opportunity, whether it's a wrist wearable or a patch or something even within your clothing now or within your socks. Like there's all kinds of interesting or within your phone, right? There's all types of interesting medical devices, software as medical devices that are capturing some very interesting clinical information.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Yeah.
This all falls under the physio AI, right? The different wearables, or is that something completely different? The remote patient monitoring, is that something that's coming from like kind of the healthcare directive, or is it more voluntary, like a Whoop, as you mentioned?
Yeah, so there's a lot of wearable companies out there right now, like the one you mentioned, that are collecting information from some device and collecting all kinds of biometric data. So now, interestingly, there's new data that's being collected that never had been before. So motion, for example, or voice, acoustics data, visual, retinal data, all these things that you would never think about as being useful to making a decision now are. So, for example, there's now wearable companies that are doing early tremor detection for Parkinson's disease or alcohol withdrawal. There's voice acoustics companies that are now detecting schizophrenia or psychiatric disease. There's all kinds of things that are now, like you have all these different biometrics in addition to the traditional ones that we all think about, like what's my heart rate, what's my blood pressure, what's my temperature. So allowing for much richer amount of data that's coming in, and which allow you to make much more precise and earlier interventions. And I tell people this all the time, is that the way that fundamentally that we're going to be taught in medical schools, and now once we have this type of data, it's going to be totally different. I've been trained on how do I make a diagnosis based off of acoustics and voice.
Yeah.
It's something that's never been done before. So if we think about how are people even going to be thinking about medical care and clinical care and diagnosis over the next decade, it's going to look completely different than I was taught.
Yeah, it seems like a big difference already, right? But sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, you're fine. Keep going.
But, I'm just thinking about the evolution of it so far and hearing some of these things that went from very generic information like heart rate and blood pressure, things like that, and then some of those other, very specific. And so I'm just kind of curious if this is, I don't even know if we can call it RPM 1.0 or not, or if we're already into 2.0, and if not, what does that even look like?
Yeah, that's funny you say that. I use that term all the time. So,
I know, I looked it up.
Okay.
I'm not that smart. I just know how to do some research.
That was your alley-oop to me, right? Yeah, I mean, that's what I think about a lot is like how we're, the first level of remote monitoring was collecting data that could be delivered to practitioners. Usually that data was late, right? If you're collecting like a heart rate or blood pressure, those are typically late findings, and whatever you wanted to intervene on is already happening or happened already. So the data that we're going to be incorporating now, the things that I mentioned, not only allows for richer data, but you can now identify things that are happening much earlier in the game. And so you can intervene earlier, have a better impact. And there'll be a 3.0, and the number of biometrics is continuing to increase every day. I think what people are trying to do now is source all these different types of data, right? Whether you have data from your wearable, you have data from your phone and your software, you have your clinical data, you have your lab data, you have your imaging data, you have all these different data. And typically, the data that you wear on your wrist or have on your phone is not used to make a decision from a medical standpoint. It's still traditional stuff. You go to the doctor to check some labs, take some blood and maybe some imaging tests, and that's how they make a recommendation. So how can you do that plus all these other things, bring that all together, and now make a decision? Will that be better than what the traditional way has been done? And the answer is yes. It's just not incorporated into our system yet. And then the other part of it is that, think about if you go to the middle of the country and you may have to go 2 hours to see a primary care doctor, or you don't have easy access to medical care or specialists. Let's say think about cancer detection. So the huge opportunity is if you can bring these technologies into underserved areas, now you're bringing medical care to people that most need it because the chronic disease is the highest in these areas. And then they can have earlier diagnosis, earlier intervention, earlier medical care. And of course, that's better for the system, right? Lower cost of care is going to drive down the cost of care for everybody. So that's what's exciting. That's what the big opportunity is. That's when we think about the monitoring, it's not just the auras and the whoops. It's about, could we use those auras and whoops to impact major populations and bend this cost curve of healthcare?
But it almost removes the geographical restriction of a physician, right? We've talked to people and like, oh, I work in this small town, or I work in, it's just whoever can drive in to see me. They sit in the waiting room and y'all filter through. You've almost blown that up where now you're just receiving data you can process through and help people. We have a friend who's been taking care of her dad for the last couple of years, and she would fly in for a week, drive him to all of his appointments, have someone come watch him. She would fly home to live her, to do the stuff. Whereas on these wearables, I'm listening to you describe it, the technology would allow the physician to actually monitor him without all of those other steps in between. The efficiency there, I think, is pretty exciting, actually.
100%. I mean, there's still real practical realities with connectivity issues and things like that. And, FDA and clinical grade versus wellness data, right? That's the big thing right now is, am I going to use this data to make a medical decision? If I make a medical decision based off this data and something's inaccurate, who's responsible? Is it the physician? Is it the medical device company, the algorithm? Who's in it?
It's responsible.
It's me.
So that's a big question people are asking. Like, well, I'm hesitant to use this because I don't know what's going to happen. So we see like a lot of data in the wellness market, which we're talking about. But to get to that clinical grade market, where we can actually make decisions on a day basis. Some questions still have to be.
Do y'all have to be U.S. based, like your investments with the technology? Can the companies be in Canada? Can they be in Mexico? Can they be in other places? Or when y'all are focusing on a company, you had mentioned not having to be FDA approved on some of the stuff, obviously. What are you?
For the Physicians Capital Fund, it is U.S. based, right? So
okay.
when we look at it, we've looked at other things but for the FICAP fund, the companies are U.S. based.
U.S. based. Okay.
I was thinking about the wearables. I won't say which one it was, but I wore one for a little while. And
because they don't sponsor the show, is that why you can't say it? That's right. until they sponsor.
I'm not talking about them until they send me a check. No, actually. So my girls got all excited about it. I've got 2 girls, and they got excited. Oh yeah, it does all these things. And I thought, okay, well let me try this out and see what it's like. And so I had it for I don't know about 2 months, and the information and the data that it feeds was almost overwhelming. And then it just sort of left me going, now what? What am I supposed to do with all this information? Which, by the way, it constantly tells me I don't get enough sleep. And I'm like, yeah, tell me something I don't know. I paid money for this. So,
no kidding. So I think that we hear that a lot, right? Like the data becomes noise, right? When you have a constant, you're barraged with all these different, it's like, great, I can measure all these things that I never could before. The worst thing to happen would be you get all this data and you stop caring about all of it. All noise and you just ignore the whole thing.
Yep.
So I think part of the RPM story or wearable story is that you have this data and to be able to distill it into useful insights that actually matter, whether it's a physician who's trying to make a medical decision or a patient that's trying to say, all right, what do I need to do differently? Or there's the whole behavioral science into this, right? It's like, okay, we're trying to change your behavior to do something that you do all the time, right? Your blood sugar spikes at 9 p.m. every night because you're grabbing something from the fridge. Okay, that's good to know. How are we fixing that? So there's a whole behavioral science aspect of this that still has to be incorporated. It's actually modification of behavior. Like, how do you change the way you do things? And then it goes into, then it's the environment. Well, what if I don't have access to fruits and vegetables and freshly prepared food? And now what? Right? So I think the data is one part of this big story that is going to be part of your environment of care, like what you get access to, the psychology of all of this. Companies that are going to be thinking about this in terms of all of that are going to be, it's going to take it much beyond just like a data play. Like, here's a bunch of data. Well, good luck. It's going to be much more holistic in the way that's the thing that I think is where all of this is headed.
Do you think that there's an adoption rate in the future that is born out of people feeling like, yes, I really need to be a part of this and have this on, and so it helps my physician, helps me? Because right now it's very much voluntary. Not that it's not, it wouldn't be kind of what I was thinking about, but is the trend going to be like, yeah, we need to do this? Kind of like, I have to have a phone to communicate in this world today. Do I need to have this device at some point? Do I feel like I need to? Is there an adoption rate by the mass society where it's really helpful? Because I don't know, is the adoption rate even big enough to see some of these impacts geographically or, even in the States to say that it's making a difference and argue for further availability of some of these devices for maybe people who don't have, like you said, sometimes you don't even have the funds to buy these things or pay for the subscriptions.
Yeah, that's exactly where we are right now. So right now it's kind of if we think about it in the pyramid, and the wellness devices right now are at the top of the pyramid for the people that are generally well or are trying to optimize or biohack their health in the wellness space. And that's where products are living right now.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that, but if we think about this from a healthcare impact standpoint, we need to get into the middle and the base of that pyramid, and so part of that will depend on things like reimbursement, or how am I going to afford this device? Is this something a payer would pay for? And these will all be outcome dependent, right? Once we can show that earlier detection is going to lead to earlier intervention, it's going to lower cost of care for hospitals and payers and patients, then it's going to be something that really has to be accessible to everybody, right? Like, and you see some of this with the CGM monitors already, but Dexcom, but if you go into the rural areas, you typically are not seeing much of this. But imagine if everybody had access to this data, if everybody had access to doing something like this, we could potentially make a massive impact in the lower underserved areas.
You brought up something earlier. If you don't mind, I want to kind of circle back on it. The high percentage of physicians leaving the workforce. Do you think that's because they started on a treadmill years ago and they went through medical school and then fellowship and they started this and they're like, this is different than what I thought, or I'm going to have to do this for so long to be able to make the money I'm going to need to be able to make. I need to pivot. Do you see this fund, this opportunity that you can bring physicians to give them an opportunity to pivot, or to maybe say, hey, there's an ability to make some additional money and you can stay on this medical path? Like, how do you position that to physicians? Is it an opportunity on ramp? Is it an opportunity off ramp? Like both? Like how are you positioning that?
Well, I certainly don't tell any physician that you invest in this and you're good to go. But, I'm not. That's
not part of the conversation.
Definitely not. I may have to lawyer up if I search.
Yeah. You have to use that med legal advisor. That's right.
So
what are you hiring your own company?
So I think in terms of like, why are people leaving the field? There's a lot of different reasons for it. I think you can point to several different factors, right? So certainly there's a financial aspect of it, as lowering reimbursements, and you're asked doing more with less, and that feeling of more with less. And more with less over a decade becomes very difficult to do. So there's a feeling of that. There's also, I'd say that, and not all of it's bad, I would say. Like, there's also a younger generation of physicians that is thinking about, well, why should I do things the way that my parents did it, or the people around me, when they're not happy and I can see what's happening to them? I'm going to try to do something in a new way. And so that they're much more entrepreneurial. Like, the number of young physician entrepreneurs that I see now, who are coding or building a product in medical school or residency. I mean, I was just trying to survive. I don't know how these people are doing it, but it is incredible. So that's actually a very positive thing that I'm seeing. I'd say the other thing are just realities with like the corporatization of healthcare, right? With the days of independent practice and autonomy and building a relationship with a community and doing that old traditional stuff. That's very much the exception rather than the norm now, right? So you're much more operating a bigger structure and a bigger entity. And with that is typically a loss of autonomy and independence. Yeah. And that doesn't sit well with physicians as well over time. I think everybody can tolerate things over a period of time, but as years go by, it becomes less and less. And then the other thing is, unfortunately, some people are just saying, how quickly what do I need to get out of this game?
Yep.
And to do something totally different, right? I see physicians doing things like in, real estate and new entrepreneurial things, or just retiring early. I think that's another thing, people just getting out of this space completely, where they may have had another 5 or 10 years had the environment been different. So that's unfortunate, because, I see a lot of good physicians that, probably would have stuck around and continued delivering care if the right environment existed.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's a multifactorial. One thing I will say is that a hybrid career is a way to extend your career in clinical medicine, right? I mean, it used to be thinking like, oh, you left clinical medicine, how could you? It's like, no, you can actually extend your career. I find that when I work less in the emergency room, like the gratification or the fulfillment in it goes up a lot. So that's one beneficial thing, is that when you start to get involved in other things in healthcare, it may make your clinical experience more rewarding at the same time. That's actually something that I found, and I tell doctors as well that are thinking about this. And then, of course, there's practical realities too, right? Like, the opportunity cost of doing something else means that you may have to take a big risk in time, effort, money, something for a period of time before something works out.
Yeah.
And, many physicians that I see will say, well, I'd like to do something else, but I'm not willing to do X, Y, or Z. And I'm not willing to take a pay cut. I'm not looking to work for equity. I'm not looking to, I'm okay. And so that's the reality of things as well.
You mentioned the loss of autonomy due to corporatization, and it seems like it's a growing issue. I kind of equate, or at least it feels like it to me, that when we talk to young residents, so bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to get into medicine, I find there's usually a correlation, even down to the specialty of why they got into medicine within their own life, whether it be family or some sort of experience that led them that direction. But then I think over time, it's kind of like maybe that young politician who really wants to make a difference and then gets into the big machine is like, oh my God, I can't really make a difference. And then they're just trying to get theirs in a way, but it doesn't harm too many people because they just get swallowed up and then they can't fight it. And I just wonder sometimes if that's the way it feels. Like, I do want to make a difference in medicine, and then that idealism gets gobbled up by the corporatization and the machine, and that kills maybe even that spirit. And that's maybe kind of what leads to some of the burnout. It's not just what they're trying to do to serve patients, but fighting some of the things that are just inefficient and they would love to change but can't. And so I guess where I'm going with that is, do you think that's the case? And if so, or even in part, what would you say that young physicians could do or should do individually or collectively to maybe reclaim some of that autonomy and still exert some influence? Or do you even think that they can at this point?
That's a good question. I absolutely think that physicians feel that way, and even the most passionate physician eventually is going to get, and maybe it's probably true for anything in life, like even the most passion will only last so long in life.
Yeah.
And eventually things become work or mundane, or you're not necessarily waking up every day, just so that's just part of life, of course. But I think that that does get accelerated in this particular environment, like where you feel like, man, what did I choose doing this for when I could? And I see my friend who's in this other field that's working less and doing way better. Like, you get a lot of that feeling. It's like, why did I do this? Like, at the end of the day, I thought I was trying to do this for the right reason, and now I'm working just as hard, if not harder, than all my colleagues around me, my friends, and I'm struggling. And so there's definitely that. I mean, I see that all the time, 100%. That is absolutely the case. In terms of what can new physicians do, I think the biggest thing would be, I think there's all kinds of things that our physicians are doing on the advocacy side and independent practice, and which I think is great, and those things should continue. New physicians, I think, should be thinking about innovation more earlier than they ever have, whether it's innovating themselves or being involved in something to create something new in the space, not just because they want to be an entrepreneur, but also because it may change their mindset about, I don't necessarily have to just operate in the traditional way that things have been doing. If at some point I decide this is not for me, I know I have the ability or the creativity or whatever word we want to use is to do that kind of a thing. I think that mindset is definitely missing because as physicians, we're never taught that. It's like, this is what you're going to do, and this is it, right? So for someone to eventually say, hey, now do something else, well, that no one's ever told you how to do any of that. And so...
Well, didn't you say earlier, too, that it was even discouraged at one point or shied away from... Don't do that.
Don't do that. You should... That's how tradition is, like, you should be in a practice and, you should try to build roots and do it for decades or stay in clinical medicine forever. Well, that's still a thing. And I don't know why. Like, I just don't understand why that's still happening, is that we actually need more physicians to be creating the new solutions that are going to help improve our system than ever before.
Yes.
And not to say it's all like this, because I work with some great academic institutions who are doing some amazing things in innovation here in DC and other places. But traditionally, like, that's just not something that physicians think about or learn from day one. So I'd say, like, what would be one thing is get physicians involved in innovation in healthcare, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be tech. It could be in any space, whatever it is, earlier.
Yeah. I think that's a good suggestion. I did want to actually come back to the venture capital piece for a second, because physicians do make good income. I think that they carry a big target on their back for people trying to get them to invest in all sorts of crazy things and, whatever, whether it be a emu farm or some other thing, who knows, right? But I've come across plenty of stories where, you just, unfortunately, somebody was taken advantage of, and we hate to see that. Worked too hard for that money, and they trustingly passed it. So, what word of advice, if somebody does see getting out into private markets or venture capital, how would you guide them, or what would you say to recommend that they do or look out for to avoid certain things like that, pitfalls? And maybe what do you think they most misunderstand about venture capital as a whole?
Oh man, well, I'm certainly not going to give anybody investment advice.
No, and I'm not asking you to. I think more or less how to, evaluate not a specific thing, but like steps of before you do this, go talk to somebody about this, or how to evaluate before you even make any decisions.
That's a great question. I mean, I think just very generally speaking, like the traditional, not boring investment vehicles are probably still the best for the majority of whatever you want to do. If you're thinking about alternative investments, physicians will get deals thrown their way. It's like, hey, and it's easy to get excited about a deal, and like, hey, this is about to blow up. The number of times I've heard that this sector is about to blow up. This is about to go crazy. This is going to be a unicorn. Just remember that 99% of those discussions will never.
You hear that 900 times.
That's what I was about to say. 900, and you also like 10 to 12, right?
And so everybody listening, just catch that. He hears it 900 times a year. He's like, yeah.
This is about to blow up, or this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Just move on, or just don't get excited. So don't get excited, But also, if you're thinking about getting into the VC space as well, I think that you should obviously look at the general partners, like the fund structure, the types of things that they invest in. Is it even an area that that you have any opportunity, any insight toward, or are you just throwing a dart at a wall? And if you are throwing a dart at a wall, that's okay too, I guess. A VC is an alternative asset class. And by that, it's that this should not be your livelihood that is at stake in this space, right? So and we tell physicians that all the time, is that, they invest through IRAs or they invest a small amount, and our minimum check size for our fund is $25,000, and which just so that we get physicians to have exposure to the space. So I'd say, do your homework on the fund thesis and make sure that that these are alternative investment vehicles. This should not be keeping you up at night if this doesn't work out. These are a risky bet. These are riskier asset classes with a higher upside. And to know that going into it as well. So I think one other thing from our fund in particular is that we have a lot of physicians. Mm-hmm. And physicians typically operate a lot on trust. They may not have time to do a lot of the due diligence or have even know what questions to ask. But what does help them is to know that, hey, I got 50 plus physicians from all over the country, that I know or that I trust that are doing this. I may want to take a look at this further. And so I think that trust factor does help too.
Yeah, I think that's a good tip. And everybody listening, always have to look at your own situation. Too many times I've heard somebody said, well, some colleague told me this, and it just may not apply to your situation. And it may not be something that's good for you. And I'm glad that you said that, Vipul, is that sometimes just what may seem boring is best. Also, risk and return are always relative. So if the return seems really amazing, so is the risk that comes with that, and it could be total. So I think people just need to be careful and always be evaluating to the best of their ability. I liked your comment about, maybe even you didn't say this, but stay in your lane of knowledge. If there's something that in your field, maybe that makes sense because you can understand it a little bit better. But again, I always hate that it's not that people aren't wanting to do it. It's just that sometimes they are going in blindly and then they lose and sometimes lose big. And that's the unfortunate part because, it comes at hard-earned dollars. So.
Yeah. If people have the mindset that I'm going to throw a dart at a wall and it's okay, go for it. But as long as you know that that's what you're getting yourself into. For me, that's not something I do, but I stay in healthcare for the most part just because that's what I know. And I like to try to stay in my lane.
Yeah. Well, looking ahead, do you see, or can you even share on some of the maybe more exciting emerging technologies in AI or precision medicine, workflow automation, or things like that you've talked about that you're really excited about, or maybe even some that might be overhyped or not going to make the difference that some people might think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of companies that are just they're wrapped in these GPT wrappers or whatever, and these AI tech companies, and there's not much more than that. The companies that are really adding something beyond that, so that are capturing like a whole workflow from end to end, those companies are going to be hard to displace. The point solution companies that are trying to fix one particular problem in a physician works, it's more of a feature rather than a company. So I'd say beware of that. The exciting stuff, the stuff I mentioned earlier with the monitoring, wearable devices, remote patient monitoring, that stuff and biometric capture, super exciting. Where we see a ton of opportunity, though, is the stuff that I mentioned earlier in the boring spaces of back office. But that's the stuff that is like, hey, if I can address this prior auth problem, if I can make sure that patients show up on time to their scheduled appointments, if I can prevent unnecessary cancellations, if I can make sure a patient stays on their medications after discharge. Those things are huge because those errors create a massive impact to the system, in terms of lost productivity, lost dollars. So like there's very huge impact that we can show in those types of investments. So those are the things I actually get quite excited about because you can actually measure their impact, their ROI, usually quicker than some of these clinical ones.
Because of the more immediate implementation or the impact financially?
Both.
You can see.
Because it's like I'm solving for cancellation rates. I'm solving for a prior auth. I'm solving for how quickly a patient can see a specialist. Okay, those are very measurable things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm just trying to get patients engaged, they'll modify their behavior or do something. That's a much harder thing to do, right? So it's just I'm solving for a known metric, and that metric is tied to millions or billions of dollars in waste, right? So like cancel appointments or misscheduled appointments, a prior auth issue I mentioned. These are all things that are occupying huge amounts of wasted dollars in our healthcare system. So we like those because we can measure the outcomes very easily without an FDA process. There's no clinical trials typically in this space that are necessary to prove benefit or outcome. And they do benefit patients because when patients can get their procedures or get things scheduled and improve compliance, they're healthier as well. So even though they're not clinical, they are impacting clinical care.
Do you think that you talked about how there could be savings in that hopefully reduces the healthcare costs, but it seems like if you're a hospital or even a private practitioner or smaller partnership, if you can realize some of these efficiencies that you're trying to build, well, if there's savings there, they're likely to keep those first. At what point does it maybe actually trickle down to the end user and the patient in like a premium for healthcare or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, those savings will, may show up as lower premiums. And some of the solutions that we even look at are ways for patients to capture more, or for a hospital or for a payer or someone to capture more of those revenues. Things that are looking at, like compliance and billing. Those things are capturing more dollars for potentially for a hospital, but they're also potentially adding to more that the patients may recover as well. So I think that there's a lot of solutions that are going to benefit multiple stakeholders out there. Anytime if processes are improved or made more efficient, that's better for the system. And when things get more efficient, then the patients are going to benefit both financially and also from a productivity standpoint too. Remember, a lot of this stuff translates into like lost labor or productivity issues, right? If you can get patients to come to an appointment and not reschedule, that's a benefit to the patient, but also, improve productivity to the system as well.
I was just thinking of kind of some wrap-up thoughts here, but one of the things I would ask is we've been talking about some of these changes, and like you said, they're not exciting, but it seems more or less structural in terms of the healthcare system. And so I guess if there's a specific, and maybe if you already said this, but is there one thing, structurally speaking, if you could change this element about healthcare tomorrow, what would it be and why?
Oh, wow. What a question to end with.
We haven't even gotten to the end yet.
Right. I think I would say in the present system right now that adoption of solutions through technology or others is very difficult in the present system, right? So especially in things that are hospital-based, that are delivering very expensive care, to allow for more innovation, more pilots, more testing, so that those things can be delivered faster. Typically, to do these kinds of things in a hospital is measured in years or decades. If that can get compressed to a shorter time period, we can just get more solutions to market faster. Easier said than done, I know, but in terms of a wish list, if we were to create this amazing innovation space, which we are, but to allow that to be translated into the real world more quickly than we do, I think that would be, in terms of how quickly can we make an impact to the system, I think that would be something I'd want.
Yeah, and I think that folks like yourself and people who are trying to monitor the healthcare space, both internally from a clinical side and non-clinical, just trying to make a difference. Having had this discussion, I feel like we'll get there someday. It does take a little bit. And I hope people listening to this feel like they can make a change that can be positive, and maybe they can join you along the journey. Before we do wrap up, the last question that we have is, the name of the show is The Patient Physician. And so the last question is what does that mean to you?
The patient physician.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. So I think that
you're like, the show is called The Patient Physician. I'm kidding.
No. I think that one thing that, just now thinking about it, the patient physician is thinking about things in terms of in different mindsets. So what I always say is, like, whether you're building a product or as a clinician, now when you're sitting in tech, you actually have to put yourself in the space in multiple stakeholders. It's not just about you. A physician, when you train to be a physician, it's typically like, hey, I'm the quarterback, I'm running the show. Mm-hmm. Now you have to get out of that mindset when you get into innovation space, because you have a team and you've got multiple people now that all have a specific responsibility, and they're a stakeholder. All these things need to work together. So when you say patient physician, it's like you actually kind of need to be the patient a little bit. You have to think about things in the other person's eyes, and you have to relish that role of, like, I know what I know, and I'm very important to this team. However, I'm not the only one on this team. The whole team. There's no I in team, right? So I think that gets lost, especially for physicians that are trying to make that pivot, because that's not something that you are trained with. You're typically trained with the mindset of, hey, it's on you. You got to make sure everything runs. So embracing that new mentality, I think, is what that would mean to me. And the other thing I'll say is, in terms of the patient physician, in terms of in the other context of the word, is that there is a lot of patience that is required. So, like, as everybody wants quick action and quick results, but when going into this innovation and entrepreneurship or in a tech space, things move quickly, but sometimes they don't. And so you sometimes take a lot of no's before a yes. And so it does require some degree of humility and patience to be able to know that not everything's going to work out, and not everything's measured in terms of one success and failure. And just to have that mindset of, like, yeah, I'm okay with that. Not everything is going to work out in this space, nor should it. And I think that would be something to just go in with that mindset.
That's great. I appreciate you joining us, Vipul. Thank you so much. And for listeners to learn more about the Physicians Capital Fund, we'll post that in the show notes along with links. And to our listeners, thank you for being part of the patient-physician community. If you enjoyed today's story, please like, subscribe, and to share your story with us. We would love to have that as well, because there is somebody patiently waiting to hear it. Thanks so much.
Thank you both.
This conversation was brought to you by Physicians Resource Services, a firm supporting medical professionals to improve their financial situation and pursue their personal and professional goals. The Patient Physician is produced in Austin, Texas. Editing and sound design are in the hands of the PodConnects podcast network. Please email questions or show ideas to info@physiciansrs.com.